Tonight at 10, terror in the south of France. More than 80 people have been killed and 200 others have been injured. Run down by a lorry, many women and children are among the dead. Fleeing for their lives, thousands run in panic as the attack unfolds.
I was feeling that I'm gonna die. I was feeling really, really scared. I didn't know what to do, but I just gave up.
The killer is shot dead at the wheel, but only after leaving carnage along a mile-long stretch of road. He's been identified as Mohamed Lahouej Boulel, known to the police for violence and petty theft.
He would have nervous attacks. He said he had to take his medication. When he became nervous, he broke everything. He demolished everything.
Holidaymakers Paul and Rebecca Gordon were caught up in last night's chaos.
I could see pretty much the whole event unraveling, and I just turned to my left and I just saw the whole road was covered in people.
Tonight, just 8 months after the attacks on the Bataclan Theatre in Paris, France is in mourning once again.
And there's another major developing story tonight. Reports of a military coup in Turkey. Bridges in Istanbul are blocked and there's gunfire in the capital, Ankara. These are images emerging showing a military presence on the streets of Turkey tonight. We'll have the very latest live.
In the south, dubbed the donut effect, plans that could see 10,000 homes built circling one of our national parks. And a whole new air show for astronaut Tim Peake. He's been at Farnborough to talk to a captive audience.
Good evening from Nice in the south of France, the scene of a major terror attack. Around about this time last night, this whole area was full of people, thousands and thousands of people enjoying a fireworks display in honor of Bastille Day, France's national day. But by the end of the evening, 80 people were left dead after a lorry plowed into the crowds of people here, killing 80 and leaving 200 injured. Many of those who were wounded and who died are women and children. And tonight, 50 people are still critically ill in hospital. Now, the attacker has been identified as Mohamed Boulel, a 31-year-old local man. And more on him and the investigation in a few minutes. But first, our Paris correspondent, Lucy Williamson, reports on the Bastille Day attack. And some of the images in her report you may find distressing.
They dared to celebrate freedom and paid with fear. Beach lovers, party-goers, children. Out to honour Bastille Day and the founding values of France. Hunted with the most mundane of weapons, a lorry. It arrived as the fireworks were ending, crawling onto the promenade before picking up speed and heading straight for the crowd. Its first appearance caught on camera by this man.
Up until this very moment here, the truck actually didn't run over anybody, yet there was a motorcyclist trying to approach the truck, trying to open the door while driving. He failed and he fell off the motorcycle. And then there were two police officers standing right here at that very corner, and they fired 2 gunshots at the driver of that truck. So up until then, or from that moment on, the rampage took place. Like the vehicle accelerated and ran just in a very odd way, right in the middle of the crowd.
It zigzagged for more than a mile through the street party as people ran. Bodies were falling like skittles, one witness said. Another saw parents throwing their children over fences to try and keep them safe.
surrounded the car and they kept shooting him until they are sure he's dead. I saw him dead already. I saw his head outside the window of the truck. And again, the French police officer, when he saw me standing up and filming, he came to me aggressively and yelled at me to get down, get down. All the people on the beach to run because I think they thought maybe there is a bomb in the car or something, or other people hiding inside the truck itself from behind. So at that moment, I realized that this is really something wrong, and I started to run with the people.
Un pistolet automatique de calibre 7,65 mm.
In the cabin, there was an automatic weapon, bullets, a Kalashnikov, and M16s, a grenade, a mobile phone that's still being investigated, and various documents.
Along the now empty promenade, those who couldn't run waited for help. The Children's Hospital alone counted 50 arrivals. And the faces of those killed here last night have also begun to emerge. Among them, Sean Copeland and his 11-year-old son Brody, visiting from Texas. Other members of their family survived. A friend said they were heartbroken. And 20-year-old Russian student Victoria Savchenko, outrun by the truck. Her friend Polina was hospitalized. French officials say the driver was a local man, Mohamed Boulel, a French Tunisian, known to police for petty crimes. Today, the only figures on Nice's empty seafront were forensics teams, picking their way through the debris of grief. France was just beginning to feel safe again after the attacks here last year. Safe enough even to come out and celebrate being French. But as people ran screaming down this street last night, the sound of gunfire mimicking fireworks, that moment of national pride and national unity became once again an individual race to survive. Imad said he froze when he saw the lorry, then ran towards the beach. Above the screams, he heard the lorry's engine just behind him. His path ahead blocked by a bench.
And then when I jumped over the bench, I found myself that I jumped on a woman. She was laying on the ground too. So I just closed my eyes and waited for the crash, neither to crash me or neither to survive. I was feeling that I'm gonna die. I was feeling really, really scared. I didn't know what to do, but I just gave up on that moment. Till I saw the bench breaking up. It was too loud and too scary. So I looked at it and I found it destroyed. So it was really, really close. The thing that was between me and the truck, it was a bench, a small bench.
The French president arriving in Nice today described the attack as a monstrosity. Of the 200 people injured, he said 50 were hovering between life and death.
We are facing a long battle because we have an enemy who will continue to hate all the peoples, all the countries who enjoy liberty, who put liberty as the essential value.
The flowers blooming on the barricades today mark a particular kind of pain. The slow, mocking torture of French values. Attacks that highlight the price of freedom, the failure of fraternity, and that brutal equalizer, death. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Nice.
So, as we've been hearing, the truck travelled for more than a mile, ploughing into people before the police, the authorities managed to shoot the driver dead. And many people are wondering how the driver managed to continue to keep going, leaving mayhem all around him. Well, our correspondent John Donison now reports on how that lorry was used to such devastating effect.
It was supposed to be a night of celebration. It ended in confusion, chaos and carnage. The attack started around 11 o'clock local time as thousands of families strolled home after a night of fireworks. The lorry was heading east along the Promenade des Anglais and picked up speed on a rampage that was to last for more than a mile. This time last night, the attacker was making his final preparations. It was about here that he turned his truck onto the Promenade des Anglais, picked up speed and began his rampage into the crowds. Within minutes, the first casualties were reported. The driver began to swerve from side to side, trying to kill as many people as possible. He then careered into the pedestrian area. Armed police opened fire, but couldn't stop him as he continued to plough through the crowd. Eyewitnesses say he was travelling at around 50 miles an hour. This is as close as we can now get to the route the attacker took. You can see the Promenade des Anglais just behind the famous Hotel Negresco at the bottom of the street. By this point, several minutes into the attack, he'd already killed dozens of people, and it was to be 300 or 400 more meters that way before he was finally stopped as people fled for their lives. Finally, further down the promenade, using heavy fire, police managed to stop the lorry and kill the driver as people fled in panic. Matthew Schooler from Kingston upon Thames had been on what was meant to be a dream holiday with his girlfriend. Today, he knows they're lucky to be alive.
There was a lady in front of us on a scooter with her kids and she fell over. She wasn't trampled, but people running over her. The kids were upset. People were picking up kids and running, and the kids were crying, as you can imagine. People didn't really know what was going on.
This was not a high-tech attack, but the brutality and the banality of the method make it all the more terrifying. A vehicle used as a weapon of war. John Donnison, BBC News in Nice.
Well, one of the British couples caught up in last night's chaos and mayhem was Paul and Rebecca Gordon from the Midlands. They're here on holiday with their 18-month-old baby. Our correspondent, Tom Burridge, now has been speaking to them and finding out what they saw.
Rebecca and Paul are on holiday in Nice with their 18-month-old daughter, Eloisa May, and they had walked along the promenade back to their hotel just moments before the attack.
And because we were on the 4th floor, I could see pretty much the whole event unraveling, and I just turned to my left and I just saw the whole road was covered in people, and he just accelerated at a faster speed than he had approached the hotel, and he hit everyone. I saw the truck bounce, which must have been, you know, and I saw people being knocked like skittles.
You just went, you were great, and you came running in and said, look what's happened, and I came out and there's just people on the floor, just dead.
As parents, they can barely imagine what it's like for others.
There was a lot of families there was a lot of children, there was a lot of teenagers, I noticed. So you think of, there was a lot of young lives lost, I think, a lot of young lives. Yeah. Which is sad.
We're safe, you know, everything's okay.
It's a time when you think about the important things in life. There's fear and grief, but also things to reassure.
I have to say that coming out into Nice, I admire the people here because everybody's just out in the street and just getting on with life.
Tonight, the last night of their holiday, their hotel overlooks a crime scene. But they know they were the lucky ones. They saw but survived a night of horror in Nice. Tom Burridge, BBC News in Nice.
Well, detectives have been working hard to find evidence of the killer's connections, and today police raided the flat here in Nice where Mohamed Boulail was living. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner has the latest on the investigation and the killer.
A picture-perfect promenade scarred by the horror of last night's attack. French investigators have spent much of the day piecing together what happened here. Fingerprints found in this lorry confirmed its driver as being Mohamed Bouhalel. He lived alone in this apartment building in Nice. Police have forced their way in, and a neighbour confirmed this identity card as belonging to him. Police investigators have taken away anything that could throw a light on why Bouhalel would commit such an abominable act. Another neighbour recalls his behaviour as being odd.
He looked at us weirdly. If we arrived at the building behind him, he would slam the door in our faces. Frankly, not normal.
So what do we know about the attacker in Nice? Mohamed Bouhalel was a 31-year-old delivery driver. He was Tunisian by birth, he had 3 children, but he lived alone in Nice. He also had a police record for petty crime and violence.
Mohamed Laoueche Boulel était connu des services de police et de justice.
He was known by the police for violence and petty theft between 2010 and 2016. He was convicted in March and sentenced by the court to 6 months in prison. But there's nothing to suggest any sign of radicalization.
At a separate address in Nice today, police arrested a woman thought to be Bouhalel's wife. Friends and neighbours tried to keep the media at bay. And in Tunisia, near the resort town of Sousse, Mohamed Bouhalel's father, Mondher, has revealed his son was on medication for psychiatric problems.
We thought he was doing well. Here is the medical certificate. I took him to the psychologist. He followed his treatment, but sometimes he would have nervous breakdowns and demolish everything. I think the problems with his wife might have made things worse.
Tonight, the instrument of so many people's death and injury has been towed away, but the unanswered questions remain. Why did this man commit mass murder? And was he driven by mental illness or ideology? Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Well, around the world, leaders have condemned last night's attack. Theresa May said Britain must redouble its efforts to defeat terrorism, while Barack Obama, speaking tonight, said the attacks were a threat to the whole world. Our diplomatic correspondent, James Robbins, has this report now on the international reaction.
La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, at tonight's opening of the BBC Proms. A packed Royal Albert Hall stood to mourn the victims of Nice. Both tribute and act of defiance.
If, as we fear, this was a terrorist attack, then we must redouble our efforts to defeat these brutal murderers who want to destroy our way of life. We must work with France and our partners around the world to stand up for our values and for our freedom.
I now invite Council members to rise to observe a minute of silence in tribute to the memory of the victims.
In New York, at the United Nations, the Security Council chose silence to speak for the world, remembering victims not only in France, but also of recent attacks in Bangladesh, Iraq, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And tonight, the most powerful leader of all was not holding back, blaming IS or ISIL for direct or indirect responsibility.
We will not relent. We're going to keep working together to prevent attacks and defend our homeland. We are going to keep taking out ISIL leaders and pushing ISIL back in Syria and Iraq. We're going to keep standing with our partners from Africa to Afghanistan, and we are going to destroy this vile terrorist organization.
His Secretary of State, John Kerry, and Russia's Foreign Minister joined in honouring the dead of Nice. They disagree on many issues, but not the threat confronting so much of the world. Some leading Muslim scholars expressed outrage at the attack. The Grand Mufti of Egypt said, "People who commit such ugly crimes are corrupt and follow in the footsteps of Satan, cursed in this life and in the hereafter." While the Tunisian government described an act of extreme cowardice. We express solidarity with France against the scourge of terrorism. And at the French embassy in London, there have been powerful expressions of dismay and support. Over the past couple of years, the British have regularly been grieving with the French after so many attacks there. And just a few hundred yards away at the Albert Hall, France's anthem resounded once again tonight in a great British arena. James Robbins, BBC News.
Well, with me now is our Paris correspondent, Lucy Williamson. Lucy, it's quite strange actually being here 24 hours on with all the security and police everywhere, when last night the scene was so different, thousands of people enjoying a fireworks display.
hard to believe, isn't it? And especially when you think of all the churches around here holding services tonight, a vigil just over the road building here. But there are two different moods in Nice tonight, I think. There's what you can see here with the forensics teams and the police, but just a few streets away, the bars are pretty packed. The streets are not empty, although perhaps not as full as they might be. And there is a feeling here, I think, of defiance as well as of fear. We saw that again after the Paris attacks in November. People came out very quickly to the bars and the terraces and showed they would not be afraid. But underneath that, I think there is a new fear, there is a wariness, and of course questions about how safe people feel, how far the government here can keep them safe.
Yeah, I mean, the Deputy Mayor has been saying that he's hoping to open up this road to show defiance against the terrorists. But having said all that, we know that the state of emergency was due to come to an end quite soon. Now it's been extended.
Yes, and I think the tragedy here is that France was beginning to relax a little bit. It was beginning to feel that with the European Championships passing off peacefully, that they could start to feel a bit more confident about security in France. Just a few days later, this happens. And this happens with the state of emergency still in place, with all those extra soldiers on the streets, with the government on high alert. So I think the pressure is very much growing on President Hollande's government now.
Indeed. Okay, Lucy, thanks very much indeed for that. Well, that's it for now from Nice, but just a quick reminder that you can get much more information on the terror attacks here, including a live page with the very, very latest. That's at the BBC website, bbc.co.uk/news. Now, for the moment, it's back to you, Rita, in the studio.
Clive, many thanks. Well, in another major story tonight, the Prime Minister of Turkey has declared that an attempt at a military coup is underway in the country. Binali Yildirim has appeared on Turkish television to say that action is being taken by part of the military outside the chain of command. But one news agency has reported the Turkish military is saying that it has taken over. Earlier this evening, there were reports of gunfire in the capital Ankara, and military jets and helicopters were seen flying over the city. And there are also reports that in Istanbul, the entrances to bridges have been blocked. Here's our correspondent, Andy Moore.
The details of what's happening tonight in Turkey are unclear. The pictures are unverified. But there's little doubt there's a big military presence on the streets of the country's two main cities. In a statement, Turkey's armed forces said they had taken power to protect democratic order and maintain human rights. They said the rule of law would be protected. The media in Turkey is heavily controlled by the state, but pictures have emerged on social media of unusual military activity in Istanbul on the bridges across the Bosporus. Roadblocks were set up, stopping some traffic moving from the Asian to the European side. And in the night sky over the capital Ankara, a low-flying military jet. Gunshots were also reported. The Turkish Prime Minister, Binali Yildirim, who had earlier been speaking of his support for France, said this evening that some members of the military have been acting outside the chain of command. He said those taking any illegal action would pay the highest price. Nothing has been heard so far from the Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, seen here recently at a NATO summit in Warsaw. He's reported to be on holiday in the Turkish coastal resort of Bodrum. Turkey has been hit recently by a string of bomb attacks in Ankara and Istanbul. Islamic extremists were said to be to blame. The government has responded by cracking down on any opposition. Turkey is in a state of crisis tonight. All flights from Istanbul's Ataturk airport have been cancelled. There are severe restrictions on the internet, with many types of social media shut down. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Let's go straight now to our correspondent Katie Watson, who's in Istanbul for us. Katie, the situation appears confused. What more can you tell us?
It's all happened in the last hour and a half, and the events that are no clearer really. It's still a very muddy picture. What we do know is the Prime Minister Yildirim has said that this looks like some kind of attempted takeover by a part of the military. The military has put out a statement saying this is an entire takeover and they've done it to restore democratic order, to maintain human rights, and that they will be continuing with international agreements. So at the moment, those are the two sides really coming through. Now, what we've seen on the streets has been commotion, there's been traffic jams because both sides of the bridges have been shut off. There have been aircraft flying here in Istanbul and in Ankara. So it's very much a muddy picture and no clearer really exactly what has happened. But certainly the military say that they have taken over.
And Katie, Turkey is such a major power. This has huge implications globally.
Absolutely. It's a member of NATO. It's a key ally in the Middle East. But Turkey's been going through a lot of political instability with the bombings most recently of the airport here in Istanbul, Ataturk Airport. So there was a feeling really that perhaps the military and the government were working together to be able to beat that. Certainly people here in Istanbul are shocked. People are glued to their telephones, their televisions, radio, just to find out exactly what is going on. Certainly people here have no idea, and this really did come as a surprise.
OK, Katie Watson in Istanbul, many thanks. Well, let's talk again to our diplomatic correspondent, James Robbins, who's with me. James, dramatic events tonight. Why might this be happening now?
I think it might be happening because President Erdogan has made so many enemies within Turkish society. He's made an enemy of many of the urban young, and he unleashed the power of the state against them 3 years ago to put down popular protest. He's made many enemies in the military. He's imprisoned senior military officers who've campaigned against what they see as the undermining of democracy. The army has regularly intervened in modern Turkish history since the establishment of the modern republic almost a century ago by Ataturk, and when it's intervened, it's done so to try to secure secular democracy in Turkey. Secular and therefore non-Islamic within the state, within the organs of the state, and they think that President Erdogan is an Islamist who's tried to reverse, for instance, women's rights, who's tried to reintroduce Islamic law within Turkey to an unacceptable level. Also because they think he's suppressed journalistic freedom, imprisoning many journalists and closing newspapers. So there are many reasons why people in the military who regard themselves, many of them, as the guarantors of democracy, feel that they have been let down. That's not to say that this coup, if that's what it is, will necessarily succeed. But it's interesting, I've just been hearing in the last few minutes that European Union sources are suggesting that they think this is a substantial coup, which they believe probably will prevail.
And James, just briefly, clearly turmoil in Turkey, but this will be of real concern in capitals around the world too.
It'll be a huge concern. I mean, Turkey is a NATO member. It has a huge standing army, some 500,000 men and women under arms. It's regarded as a crucial bulwark, if you like, on the edge of Europe and Asia, on the frontier of those two continents. It'll be of immense concern because the idea of a deeply unstable Turkey, when so much of the Middle East is in turmoil, will frankly terrify many leaders around the world.
OK, James, thank you very much. Theresa May has used her second full day as Prime Minister to visit Scotland for a meeting with the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. They discussed the future of the Union as well as the fallout from the Brexit decision. Mrs May said she was willing to listen to options on Scotland's future relationship with the European Union. Our Scotland editor Sarah Smith reports now.
Theresa May's first mission as the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is to try to keep that kingdom united. And that means coming to visit a First Minister who would dearly love to take Scotland out of the Union.
The symbolism of this meeting is important. Theresa May demonstrating how much she cares about Scotland remaining part of the UK. But there is substance too. Talks about Brexit negotiations and about Scotland's potential place in the EU.
They both wanted to stay in the EU. Now, Mrs May has to take the UK out, whilst Ms Sturgeon tries to keep Scotland in. They did agree the Scottish Government can explore different options, and Nicola Sturgeon did bring up the prospect of Scottish independence.
It may be that if we want to protect our relationship with the European Union, then Scotland will have to consider becoming an independent member of the European Union. But I've also said that I want to consider all options along the way, and the Prime Minister has said that this process will be open to considering options that we bring forward.
Nicola Sturgeon says she has a lot in common with Theresa May, apart from their politics, of course, and their views on whether Scotland should vote again on becoming independent.
If the Scottish Parliament were to vote for another independence referendum, would you allow them to hold it?
Well, I think the question is, should there be another referendum? As far as I'm concerned, The Scottish people had their vote. They voted in 2014, and a very clear message came through. Both the United Kingdom and the Scottish Government said they would abide by that.
Some people hope Brexit makes independence more likely. Others want to see if this new Prime Minister can try to satisfy the 62% of Scots who voted to stay in the EU. Intrigued by this early visit.
It's good that she's come up to see us first instead of going abroad. And I'm a Union fan, so I'm glad that she's come up here to see us.
It could be a show of solidarity with Scotland, or it could be a kind of power game to make her presence felt here and assert her dominance.
I think she's just kind of trying to sweeten us, trying to keep us all together, trying to not let us go independent.
Theresa May says Scotland can explore different options during Brexit negotiations. But the idea of Scotland trying to stay in both the UK and the EU? One of her ministers today said that is just fanciful. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Let's go back now to our main story and the events of last night in Nice. Clive Murray is there for us now. Clive.
Yes, thank you, Rita. Today, the French government declared 3 days of national mourning in memory of those who died. And remember, this is the third major attack on French soil in the last 2 years. Of course, we had the assault on the Charlie Hebdo offices back in January, and then, of course, January last year, and the Bataclan attacks in November. So why is France being a target, a particular target, it seems? And can the country do enough to stop this kind of thing happening again? Our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, examines the unique security challenge facing France.
In Nice Cathedral, the nation which now feels more threatened than any other in the West commemorated its dead today. In the last 18 months, more than 330 people have died in extremist attacks. The state of emergency, which was imposed in November, has lasted ever since. President Hollande wanted to lift it, and then last night's attack happened.
No.
The Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, insisted tonight there'd been no lapses of security in Nice. Already, though, the opposition senses real weakness in the government's position. A series of hammer blows has shaken this country to the core. In January last year, the assault on the offices in Paris of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, 17 killed. Then last November, also in Paris, the concentrated attacks at the Bataclan Concert Hall and several other places nearby, 130 people killed. The Bataclan remains closed down, silent. If you peer through the hoardings, you can still see some of the bullet marks.
This is a real moment of crisis for France, a moment when it's being brought face to face with a new reality and with the way it's being governed. In other words, its identity and its core values, liberty, fraternity, equality, they're all being in one way or another tested and questioned and challenged.
The street around the Bataclan is pretty empty. So are the cafes. On a summer's day like this, they'd usually be jam-packed. The people I spoke to were shocked by the new disaster in Nice and nervous about France's future.
These kind of attacks are just becoming completely normal, you know. That's what actually is scary, I think.
We're all a bit lost about all the events, and like every 6 months we have something happen.
It looks as though President Hollande will pay a heavy political price for all these fears. When he arrived in Nice, people booed his motorcade. The leading centre-right opposition figure, Alain Juppé, claimed the Nice atrocity had been wholly avoidable. Just last week, a security commission made several proposals which President Hollande decided not to take up. France is reacting with defiance to the latest atrocity. This was the Eiffel Tower tonight. But even before the Nice attack, President Hollande's popularity was down to just 11%. And it's only human nature to want a scapegoat. John Simpson, BBC News, Paris.
Well, this, of course, is a major tourist destination. We're at the height of summer. There were many, many tourists here, people from abroad, enjoying the fireworks display last night. And among those here were Simon Coates and his wife Amanda. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us. Simon, just take us through what you saw last night.
Well, we'd just been to the firework display along the promenade here. It ended and we decided to cycle home. We got separated in the crowds and I went on ahead, or at least I thought I was ahead, and I decided to press on and meet up with Amanda along the way when I saw a large white van, lorry, careering down the pedestrian side of the promenade. At first I thought the driver was out of control because it was veering from side to side. Then I heard some screams, even at a distance of about 100, 200 yards. And gradually it closed and I realised that the driver was deliberately hitting people, and I could hear the sound of him hitting people with his van, with his lorry. As it approached us, I realised he was coming straight for us, and I was with a couple, an older man and a young boy of about 10. And they separated and the driver aimed for the young boy and he managed to jump clear and came towards me. I think it passed me about 6 feet away, hit him a matter of an inch at most. He was ever so lucky not to be killed. I realised that the lorry was heading straight for where my wife was coming. So I just turned round and followed the van, and it was just a trail of devastation. I was checking the injured to see if it was my wife, Amanda, and I must have seen 4 or 5 dozen dead people in various, who died in various ways. Most of them were not able to be recognised because they'd been dragged under the lorry. So I was looking for my wife's, Amanda's bike or her shoes or something that I could recognise. Eventually I followed the lorry to where it had stopped. A shootout had obviously taken place. There was a French policeman with his gun aimed at the passenger door.
And your thoughts now 24 hours on?
It's unbelievable. What took place here last night was wickedness, absolute wickedness, which is why we've come forward to speak about it, because people need to know what we're dealing with. Somebody used families as skittles, deliberately drove into them, crushed them, and people need to understand that what motivates people to do that is unacceptable.
All right, okay, Simon, I'm going to have to come in there. Simon and Amanda, I know you're very upset. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, that's it from here in Nice as France counts the cost of yet another terror attack on its soul. We have pictures that I think we can bring up for you now. This is of a vigil here in Nice in memory of those who died. We know that the President, François Hollande, will be holding a meeting of his security cabinet in the morning as he comes under increasing pressure to try and bring the bloodshed to an end. Well, there's plenty more on this story and the events unfolding in Turkey as well over on Newsnight, but from here in Nice, good night.